Pokemon episode summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 404, From Brags to Riches. The episode begins with Ash deciding to get some training in with Pikachu around Evergrande City before the next round started, as they decided to do some running for training, running along the river's edge, while Ash told Pikachu about how they had to be ready for the next round of the tournament. Pikachu agreed, nodding his head, and the two continued along, while Ash constantly wiped his head with a towel that he kept with him, because he was sweating immensely hard, because they'd been running for hours and hours on end. Once Ash and Pikachu were done running, Ash returned to the Pokémon Center of Evergrande City, seeing the Moltres flame burning brightly in the stadium torch, proud that he was the one who lit it. As he went inside the Pokémon Center, happy about the fact that he would be participating in the next round soon, he immediately met up with Max, May, Brock, and Morrison in the lobby, and noticed that Max was looking at his Pokénav, and he questioned what Max was looking at, leading Max to reveal that he was looking up information on what exactly the registration center did to verify the trainer's certification for the league in the first place, stating that he learned that the registration checked to make sure that a trainer had a total of 8 home badges so that they couldn't just cheat their way into the league without having those 8 badges. Morrison then started to complain about how it was taking so long to find out the matchups for the next round, and questioned why this was. Max and Brock looked in the league guidebook that Ash had gotten to see if there was an answer, and Brock found out that every round, for some fucking reason, they had to double check if the trainer still had 8 badges, so they had to keep checking the database again and again and again, which Morrison obviously thought was stupid, adding that Nurse Joy would be the one to announce the matchups. They just had to wait for her to do so. Although Morrison simply stared at Brock confused, implying that the only thing he had heard was the last part about Nurse Joy. He wasn't even listening to what Brock had said before, or what Max had said, which made Ash again fall over in annoyance and shock. Morrison really cared about finding out why it was taking so long, but he couldn't even care enough to listen? Alright then. Anyways, the wait was finally over as Nurse Joy started talking to a microphone that echoed throughout the entire Pokemon Center lobby, exclaiming that every trainer had been checked and verified for the tournament since they all had 8 badges, and in just a moment, the video monitor would scramble the profiles of all the competitors into matches. And she adds that the preliminary round contained 600 total trainers, and now there were only 256 trainers left for the main tournament. And she then explained the rules of this next round, being that every trainer would face an opponent in a 1-round double battle. If they won this, then they would move on to another 1-round double battle, and then if they won that, they would move on to a third one-on-one double battle, and if they won all 3, they would be one of the 32 competitors to move to the next round. Also, if you lost even one of these double battles, then you would be automatically eliminated. Max and Brock were shocked by the fact that trainers would technically only be allowed 2 Pokemon because it was a double battle. They knew that a 1-on-1 made sense for preliminaries, but 2-on-2s for a main round, that didn't seem very good. Man, wait till you see the fucking Alola League. No hate to the Alola League, but anyways. Morrison didn't seem too concerned about only being allowed 2 Pokemon, declaring that he would knock his opponent out in the blink of an eye either way. Ash tries to argue that he would blow his opponent away, not Morrison, and they start to argue, practically squirming around because of how intense they were arguing, while Nurse Joy continued talking, and eventually she officially announced all the matchups as they appeared on screen. A relatively big one in the center of the Pokemon Center lobby. So Ash and Morrison finally stop arguing and look up at the screen as Ash finds out that his next battle would be against a random-ass trainer in Stadium C, and Morrison found out that his battle would take place earlier than Ash's, and he was very happy about this, as he wanted to battle as soon as possible. Ash was excited for his round, and Ash and Morrison promised each other that they would do their best in this round so that they could hopefully battle each other in the next round, or another round after that. We then see just outside the Evergrande complex where the people were filling all the stands of the stadiums, getting ready for another day of the Evergrande conference. Ash and Gang and Tyson were now sitting together in Stadium E to watch Morrison face off against Gavin from Gonga Town. While they were watching, May and Tyson were happily munching on some good pastries and cheeseburgers as well, much to Max's annoyance on how they could only think about food, it seemed like. As Max sighed in disappointment, Max saw that Morrison was now entering the battlefield from the waiting room confidently. Ash and Brock were watching as well, very excited to see how Morrison would do. And Ash realized how confident Morrison was and hoped that Morrison could back up his confidence with skill. Then, Morrison's opponent, Gavin, came out on the opposite side of the battlefield, and Ash acknowledged that he was very muscular. Alright, dude. Gavin certainly made quite the entrance, as he flexed immediately upon entering the stadium, declaring that he would be the victor of the battle. Max and May were definitely uncomfortable from this, especially May. The referee then reminds Morrison and Gavin of the rules that Nurse Joy talked about, and declares that it was time for the battle to begin. And sure enough, the battle begins with Morrison sending out his 2 Pokemon he had chosen, Growlithe and Gligar, and Gavin follows up by calling out a Marowak and a Machamp. And we then get a view of the scoreboard. There was a time limit, but there wasn't actually a time limit, it was just to keep track of time, and there was both trainers' profiles, and the 2 Pokemon had profiles under them as well. Gavin then taunts Morrison by flexing his muscles, leading Morrison to do the same, although not to nearly the same effect, as he wasn't wearing a tank top. But anyways, the battle then begins with Growlithe starting off with a tackle that had some flames added onto it because of Growlithe's fire type, which actually ended up turning into a takedown because of this, damaging Marowak. Gavin counters by having Marowak use Headbutt, and Marowak obliged by doing a backflip and smashing his head directly onto Growlithe, knocking it down onto the ground. Then Marowak puts Growlithe into a chokehold with its bone, and it bangs its own skull on Growlithe's head, which hurt a lot because of how tough Marowak's skull was. Morrison panicked a bit, but remember he could just have his Gligar try to save Growlithe by attacking Marowak with a Fury Cutter and Guillotine, but Machamp was then shown by Gavin how to do a proper karate chop. So Machamp intercepted Gligar as it was approaching Growlithe and Marowak, and first used Protect to block Gligar, and then attacked Gligar with a karate chop. As for Growlithe, it was still reeling from the headbutt attack, sliding across the dirt, kicking up several bits of dirt in the process, but it was able to regain control of itself, and tried to use Flamethrower on Marowak, but Marowak just spins its bone to deflect the Flamethrower. Ash was impressed, thinking that Marowak spinning its bone was a custom technique it came up with, but Brock clarified that it was actually just using the move Bone Club. Machamp then uses a Dynamic Punch on Gligar, sending it flying backwards. Trying not to give Gligar a chance to recover, Gavin immediately has Machamp follow up with a Cross Chop to injure Gligar more, leaving Ash and the gang impressed with Gavin's battle skills, and Tyson was impressed as well. Morrison, however, was able to come up with a quick strategy. After a bit of a dirty staring contest between Machamp and Gligar, and Morrison had Gligar use a Steel Wing, which hit Machamp very hard, and knocking it down, since it wasn't prepared for this attack. Meanwhile, Growlithe and Marowak were still fighting, glaring at each other as they ran side by side in the battlefield, trying to get a hit on one another, and Marowak finally got a hit on Growlithe using a boomerang, and this boomerang hit Growlithe right on the goddamn jaw and sent it flying. The ball then returns to Marowak's hand because, it used a boomerang, and Gavin laughed at how bad Morrison was doing and how well he was doing. Morrison had Growlithe try another Flamethrower, but miraculously, Marowak managed to resist the Flamethrower and ran directly through it, headbutting Growlithe, knocking it away, before following up with an Ice Beam to freeze Growlithe's back leg, and making it stuck to the ground so it couldn't move. Ash and the gang were still reeling from amazement as to how Marowak hadn't taken any damage from the Flamethrower, but they then fully turned their attention to the present as Marowak continued to use Ice Beam until it had froze all of Growlithe's legs to the ground, keeping it from moving entirely, and this allowed Marowak to then knock Growlithe away with a Bone Club, which makes it fall over onto the ground, but also frees it from the ice at the same time. Meanwhile, as for Team Rocket, they were sitting up against a wall in a food storage room that was connected to the Evergrande complex, and it was where they got all their food that they were selling. Yeah, that's right, they were still dressed as vendors, because they were still doing their little operation where they were selling snacks. Although there was one key difference, because something had happened to them between episodes. It turns out that it was actually illegal to sell snacks without being authorized by someone from the official league committee, or whatever the fuck it was called. So one of these people had given Team Rocket authorization to sell snacks, but they basically had to obey him. He was their boss for the time being. Anyways, Team Rocket was very tired from selling all the food, with James wondering why the fuck they even continued to do this. Meowth agrees with this, still being against the food vendor idea, just like before, and he also didn't want to do this job because he refused to take orders from anyone other than Giovanni. Jesse agreed and stated that instead of doing this job, they should just go back to catching Pikachu instead. Team Rocket's conversation was soon interrupted, though, as they were startled when the wall behind them smashed away, and a very, very angry dude, their employer from the Pokemon League official committee, or whatever the fuck it was called, I don't know, showed up, apparently being okay with destroying a wall, as he demands to know why the fuck they weren't working, and orders them to get back to work. Since he wasn't paying them for no goddamn reason, Team Rocket tries to explain the concept of a break, and how they were currently on a break, but their boss just screams at them, demanding that they get back to work once more, which scares the absolute shit out of Team Rocket, causing them to reluctantly go back to work selling snacks as soon as possible, leaving their boss confused as to what a break even was. Meanwhile, back at the match, Gavin made Machamp hit Gligar really hard with a Vital Throw, but Gligar counterattacked with a Guillotine, hurting Machamp quite a bit as well, followed up by a Metal Claw. Next, Marowak used another Boomerang on Growlithe. Growlithe attacked Marowak with Flamethrower at the same time, so both Pokemon ended up hit. Back with Gligar versus Machamp, Gligar hit Machamp several times with a Steel Wing straight to the face, followed immediately by another Quick Attack, and hitting multiple Quick Attacks in a row. Machamp tries its best to block, but it was already weakened, so it was really tough for it to keep up with the speedy Gligar. Machamp then tries to use a Dynamic Punch, but it missed because Gligar was too fast, and Gligar then flew up and crashed down on Machamp using a Guillotine combined with a Metal Claw, knocking Machamp out, leaving Gligar to smile mischievously, happy with his win, as Morrison happily cheered, and was officially declared the winner of one of the matchups. So now, it was a 2-on-1 battle, with Gavin just having his Marowak left. Just like with any league or official battle, really, the screen that showed both the trainers' profiles showed this. Ash, along with the rest of the gang and Tyson, then complimented Morrison's skills from the stands, as Marowak reminded Morrison that it wasn't out by rushing towards Growlithe, while using a Bone Club, leading Growlithe to try and counter with a Flamethrower, but unfortunately the Flamethrower missed, and Growlithe was hit hard by the Bone Club when Marowak jumped above Growlithe and crashed its bone directly onto Growlithe's head, pushing it onto the ground and fully knocking it out, with some encouragement from Gavin. Therefore, Gavin gained a little bit of good luck back, because the battle was now even, with Morrison being down one Pokemon and Gavin being down one Pokemon. It was now just Gligar versus Marowak, which the referee officially declared. Ash and the gang were a bit worried for Morrison, now that the battle was on 1-on-1, and Gligar losing could be the end of everything, but regardless, the battle still continued, with Marowak using a Boomerang, tossing its bone directly at Gligar, but Gligar dodges and flies in for a close-range Guillotine. Marowak doesn't want to run away from the guillotine, but instead it takes it head-on, using a headbutt, hoping that would counter it, as Marowak willingly jumps up to Gligar, and the headbutt and guillotine collide in a flash of light, sending both of them towards the ground. During the fall, though, Marowak aimed an ice beam at Gligar and managed to freeze one of its wings, causing it to fly off balance and slam to the ground first. And hard at that. As if Gligar hadn't taken enough damage already, Marowak then attacked it with Boomerang, knocking it across the stadium. Marowak still doesn't let up, going for a Bone Club, rushing it at Gligar, although Morrison instructed Gligar to get back up and charge at Marowak and meet the Bone Club head-on. Gligar obliges, allowing Marowak to smash its bone against Gligar, creating a huge burst of energy, which lit up the entire stadium, surprising Action Gang. What surprised Action Gang even more, though, was that Gligar was still alright after this attack, and was able to use an Iron Tail, hitting Marowak and sending it flying, along with Marowak's bone. Marowak eventually lands against the stadium wall, and skids against it, as its bone gets dislodged from its hand, and gets wedged into the ground. After Marowak had stopped sliding against the wall, the referee saw that it was knocked out, so he officially declared it unable to battle, and gave Morrison the win. He had done it! Morrison looked up at the screen that officially declared him, Gligar, and Growlithe the winners that were moving on to the next round, and was overjoyed, starting to cry tears of joy as he hugged his Gligar. Action Gang were amazed by Morrison's strength, and Ash was now excited for his battle, wanting to show off his strength as well. Soon enough, it was just about time for Ash's match, and he knew that it was in Stadium C, as opposed to Stadium E, where Morrison's match was. So, he and Pikachu started to jog there. He just had to go with only Pikachu, so that the two of them could get in a little run for some more last-minute training, but while Ash and Pikachu were running, he and Pikachu were startled when they fell into a pitfall trap, also sending some pieces of wood down with him, along with a whole bunch of dust, because there was presumably wood on the side of the road or some shit, I don't know. When the dust cleared, Ash immediately knew what was going on, as he saw Team Rocket standing above the hole and threatening to take his Pokemon, as they did their motto, which included Wobbuffet in a spaceship, and took off their vendor outfits in the process, putting on their regular Team Rocket outfits. Now, Team Rocket were in front of the wall, with James sending out his Trimecho to scare Ash or some shit, but their employer then broke through the wall, revealing himself again. Where'd this wall come from, you may ask? Well, I'd wager it probably was one of the stadium walls or some shit, and the guy just came through it after walking through the stadium just to yell at Team Rocket. But anyways, after coming through the wall, their boss just again yelled at Team Rocket for not working, as Team Rocket tried their best to make excuses, but their boss was so intimidating that they couldn't come up with anything, and just rushed off back to work as fast as they could without any more complaints. The boss left following this as well, leaving Ash to get out of the hole, since Team Rocket wasn't stopping him, confused by what the fuck just happened. Anyways, he quickly made his way into Stadium C so that he could meet up with his opponent and begin the battle. His opponent was a trainer named Dominic from Inuit Town, and without further ado, the referee declared that it was time for the battle to begin, as Ash sent out his Torkoal and Corphish, while Dominic sent out his Tropius and Swallow. Yeah, that's right, we actually get a Tropius debut, guys. No way. Nate, Max, Brock, Tyson, and Morrison were watching from the stands, while May was holding Pikachu while Ash battled, since he wasn't going to be used, and she also took the opportunity to scan for Swallow, even though she knew about it, she just needed a refresher, and also scan Tropius with her Pokedex, because she had never seen one before. The battle then began with Tropius startling Ash and the gang with its ability to fly. Ash and the gang certainly didn't expect this, since it looked like a grass type. Tropius then goes in for the first attack, being a Razor Leaf. But the attack essentially just did jack shit, because Torkoal used Iron Defense to draw into its shell to minimize the damage, and Corphish used Harden to minimize the damage on itself. So Tropius then tried a Bullet Seed instead, and this did do damage to Torkoal, but not a whole lot, because Torkoal was still using Iron Defense, which mostly negated the attack. Tropius then tried numerous other Bullet Seeds on Torkoal, but still nothing. As for Swallow, it used a Sludge Bomb on Corphish. And although Corphish's Harden was enough to deflect one Sludge Bomb, when the Sludge Bombs were used continuously, Corphish ended up getting pushed back through the stadium. Tropius still focuses on Torkoal, blowing it back with a Gust attack. Despite it being blown back a bit though, it still managed to get off a Flamethrower, dealing massive damage to Tropius, since it was still a grass type, even though it was flying. Ash was very much relieved, because the Gust had stopped, and the Gust was blowing him back. However, Ash was disappointed when he had Torkoal follow up with an Overheat, but Tropius managed to dodge it. Swallow then tries to use Body Slam on Corphish, but Corphish manages to jump out of the way just in time, and as punishment for Swallow trying to hurt it, Corphish uses Bubble Beam on it, but since Swallow was so bulky and slimy, the Bubble Beam just bounced off its body, much like how it would bounce off the Snorlax, who was also fat and slimy. Ash panicked a little, not knowing how he was supposed to deal with Swallow when all of his attacks would just bounce off, so he decided to take a break from focusing on Swallow for a bit, and instead ordered Corphish and Torkoal to focus entirely on Tropius, with Torkoal using Flamethrower multiple times on it, and Corphish using Bubble Beam multiple times on it. Tropius did get bombarded for quite a while by these attacks, but purely due to its sheer strength, it was able to break free and started to charge up a Solar Beam attack. Ash knew that the Solar Beam would be very careful, so he tried to stop it before it would get launched, having Corphish use a Crab Hammer straight to Tropius' head. And Max, Nate, Brock, and Morrison got excited, since Tropius was knocked to the ground from this attack, but even then, it still continued to charge up its Solar Beam, so Torkoal tried to stop it by hitting it with a Flamethrower, but to no avail, as Tropius launched the Solar Beam. So Ash had Torkoal try to counter it with Overheat, and the attacks collided fiercely. And both Tropius and Torkoal upped the power of their respective moves as much as they can, and this eventually caused an explosion, as both Pokemon reached their maximum power with their attacks, and the explosion enveloped both Torkoal and Tropius, and when the mist from the explosion cleared, it was revealed that both Torkoal and Tropius were knocked out, unable to battle, having been knocked against opposite side walls, which the referee officially declared. So now the battle was just between Swalot and Corphish. As the screen showed that it was now between Corphish and Swalot, Ash and the gang were a bit worried, although Dominic was unfazed and had his Swalot use a shockwave attack, which hit Corphish to damage it a lot and sent it flying back, steaming. However, Swalot didn't stop there and hit Corphish with a second shockwave attack, knocking it to the ground, causing an explosion of black smoke, leaving Corphish wincing in pain. Making Ash worried, and Ash worried even more, as Swalot then went to body slam Corphish, and even though this did damage Corphish a bit, Corphish was able to use Crab Hammer to knock Swalot off of it. Unfortunately though, that's all the Crab Hammer did, as Swalot didn't seem actually hurt by the Crab Hammer at all, and immediately tried to hit Corphish with a Shadow Ball, and this Shadow Ball blew Corphish straight across the battlefield. And Corphish simply continued to get blown farther and farther back, as Swalot attacked with even more Shadow Balls. Although Ash came up with a plan, telling Corphish to run towards Swalot and hit it with a Crab Hammer, leaving May, Max, Brock, Morrison, and Tyson immensely shocked by Ash's ballsiness, and the entire crowd was shocked as well. But regardless, Corphish went in for the Crab Hammer, but on its way to Swalot, Swalot launched a shockwave. But this shockwave did jack fucking shit, because Corphish stretched out its claw to deflect the shockwave, making Swalot worry as Corphish got closer, and eventually managed to grab on with its claws to Swalot's whiskers and flip Swalot upside down, tossing Swalot over its own head, directly onto the ground. Ash congratulates Corphish on the good attack, but then he gets an even better idea, as he tells Corphish to put a claw inside of Swalot's mouth. Since Swalot's mouth was open after Corphish had forced open its whiskers because it was so painful that Swalot was like gasping out in pain, and after Corphish put its claw in Swalot's mouth, it used a bubble beam, launching a bubble beam inside Swalot's mouth, and a minor explosion occurred from the water pressure all inside Swalot, causing Swalot to get knocked out, as Corphish jumped away to avoid the explosion that occurred. And when the dust from the explosion had fully settled, the referee officially examined Swalot and saw that it was fully knocked out, and even had smoke rising from its mouth from the explosion, and officially declared Ash and Corphish the winner, and technically Torkoal as well. And with that, Ash was able to move on to the next round, just like Morrison was. As the screen officially declared Ash, Corphish, and Torkoal the winners as well, the crowd cheered for all of this, amazed by Corphish's last attack. As Ash congratulates Corphish and hugs him, while Tyson, Max, May, and Brock, as well as Pikachu, who cheered from May's arms, cheer for Ash, and Morrison compliments him, calling him a very skilled battler. Meanwhile, we then see Team Rocket. They had managed to run to a small house on the complex, having done some work as requested by their boss, but now, tired of working, as well as running, and not wanting to work anymore, so they were finally taking that break that they deserved. With Meowth lying down on the table, Jesse sitting in a chair, and James sitting on the floor. Right as Team Rocket were complaining about their work that they had done, and their running that they had done, they were then startled as their boss broke through the wall of this small house yet again. Team Rocket immediately freaked out in pure fear, almost crying, and they go down to their knees, apologizing and begging for forgiveness for not working, but the boss just laughs and praises them for their hard work, also giving them their reward, a gourmet meal of food. Team Rocket were obviously overjoyed, and instantly now love their new boss, chowing down. Their boss then leaves after watching them eat, and says that he expected them at work tomorrow, saying that if they worked as hard as they did today, he may give them a dessert tomorrow. Right as their boss leaves the house, Team Rocket instantly agree to work food stands tomorrow and deliver food and just all that shit, and they talk about how much they love the new boss to each other after that. But I'm sure once they recovered from their food coma, they would realize that they really just didn't want to work at all, and they would find a way to worm their way out of it. Anyways, back with Ash and the gang. They were all outside the Pokémon Center, and Morrison and Ash were arguing about whose battle was more entertaining and about who won easier, with Ash arguing that Morrison almost lost, and Morrison arguing that Ash almost lost. Yeah. And as the argument got more and more heated, May, Brock, and Max stopped the argument, as Max had something to say. As Ash and Morrison turned to Max, seeing Pikachu on Max's head, Max revealed that, according to the Pokénav, which told him information about the league, I guess, maybe he signed into their database, who fucking knows, maybe there was a code in the guidebook, who cares? Anyways, he revealed that Tyson had also won his battle this round. We just didn't get to see it, I guess, and nor did Ash and the gang, and Morrison. But regardless, Ash and Morrison were equally thrilled by this news, and were excited because that meant that they potentially had a chance to face Tyson, and they both set their sights on winning their next matches, in case they didn't face Tyson next round, so that they could face him later, as well as each other. Max also reveals that the Pokénav showed him that tomorrow, the next round would begin, and all of the profiles would be shuffled again for random matchups. Ash and Morrison then argue about who would get further in the league, and the episode ends with one last shot of the Evergrande City complex.